Chapter 1. Realizing the Cliché Universe. Arthur rubbed his temples, staring at the fluorescent lights of his office ceiling. At 28, he had fully come to terms with a bizarre reality. He was a transmigrator stuck inside a melodramatic female protagonist romance novel universe. For years, he had been a silent spectator to the city's most absurd urban legends. He watched from afar as a wealthy childhood sweetheart kept secret college boy lovers while her husband suffered silently from a terminal illness, never uttering a word of complaint. He witnessed a beautiful social media influencer blatantly cheat on her boyfriend of 7 years, only for the boyfriend to gladly propose and vow to raise the billionaire boss's biological baby as his own. He even saw men smiling through tears as they raising daughters who looked nothing like them after the mothers ran away to find themselves. The absolute breaking point, however, hit closer to home. Arthur's girlfriend, Chloe, the famously cold, untouchable campus goddess whom he had dated for 3 years, had secretly gone to the Civil Affairs Bureau. She registered a marriage license with her fragile, pitiful childhood sweetheart, Julian, and publicly posted the wedding photos on her WeChat moments with the caption, "Fulfilling a lifetime wish, leaving no regrets." Instead of exploding with fury, Arthur stared at the screen for 3 seconds, tapped the heart icon to like the post, and locked his phone. Within 2 minutes, his phone vibrated violently. It was Chloe. Her voice was panicked, breathless, and sharp with anxiety. "Arthur, don't overthink it. I only did it because Julian has a terminal illness. The doctor said he only has 3 months left to live. His ultimate dying wish was to experience being married just once in his life. It's just a piece of paper to give a dying man peace of mind. You know I love only you, right?" Arthur, who secretly possessed a golden sheet ability that allowed him to instantly master any skill or concept in existence, didn't let his voice waver. As an avid admirer of Napoleon Bonaparte, he valued absolute emotional control and calculated strategy. "I understand, Chloe," Arthur replied, his tone dripping with gentle, unbothered warmth. "I was a little startled and maybe a bit jealous, but I know how kind-hearted you are. Why don't you come over to my place tonight? I need you to comfort me a little." "Of course. I'll be there as soon as I check on his evening medication," Chloe said, sighing with immense relief. Hanging up, Arthur smiled coldly. He walked into the kitchen of the apartment and began preparing a heavy, high-nutrition dinner. He laid out a massive platter of fresh grilled oysters and stir-fried pig kidneys, dishes packed with zinc and stamina-boosting nutrients. If he was going to endure the absurd plot lines of this universe, he needed to keep his physical energy at its absolute peak. Arthur chewed slowly, feeling the raw nutrients surging into his bloodstream, readying his mind for the cold game ahead. Chapter 2. The Bunny Girl Trait. Arthur had already moved out of their shared rental apartment a full year ago. He had grown thoroughly exhausted by Chloe constantly abandoning their dinners, movie nights, and anniversaries to rush to Julian's side for various dramatic emergencies, ranging from a mild fever to sudden shortness of breath. Without telling Chloe, Arthur had purchased a luxury high-rise apartment near his company headquarters, keeping the address entirely to himself. That evening, he returned to the old, dingy rental apartment solely to meet her. When Chloe arrived, looking exhausted but relieved, Arthur handed her a sleek gift bag. Inside was a highly provocative satin bunny girl outfit. Chloe's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and disappointment. She felt objectified, wondering why the usually respectful Arthur was acting so crude. However, the crushing weight of guilt over the secret marriage license made her swallow her pride. She silently went into the bathroom and changed, her fingers trembling as she fastened the cuffs. She looked in the mirror, feeling her pristine, pure campus goddess reputation melting away into something transactional. When she stepped out, Arthur's eyes remained completely detached, evaluating her like an item on a balance sheet. An hour later, tangled in the sheets, Chloe tried to regain her usual leverage and emotional control. She ran her fingers across his chest, whispering, "Arthur, you haven't called me wife at all lately." "What?" Arthur looked down at her, a mocking smirk playing on his lips. Why would I? Wouldn't your legal husband, Julian, be jealous if he found out? The words were like a physical slap, freezing the air in the room instantly. Chapter 3. The Interrupted Night. Right on cue, Chloe's phone on the nightstand blared. It was Julian. His weak, weeping voice echoed through the speaker. Chloe, my head hurts so badly. The apartment is so dark. I'm scared to be alone. Please come back. Instinctively, Chloe's maternal, protective romance novel programming kicked in. The universal script dictated that she must immediately drop everything and fly to his side, leaving Arthur to brood in tragic, silent resentment. She tried to scramble out of bed, but Arthur's grip on her waist was ironclad. Arthur, let me go. It's an emergency, she begged, her eyes wide with a manic panic. Arthur didn't say a word. He simply forced her to stay, intentionally prolonging the encounter and delaying her departure for an agonizing 15 minutes. He utilized his cheat-enhanced stamina to completely ignore the invisible narrative hands trying to pull her away. By the time he finally let her up, Chloe was physically exhausted and deeply resentful, her legs trembling violently. Arthur, smoothly dressed, grabbed his car keys and offered to personally drive a completely silent, deeply sore Chloe to Julian's apartment complex across town. Chapter 4. Confrontation at the sickbed. Inside the dimly lit apartment, Julian was lying in bed, pale, sweating, and glaring at Arthur with hidden malice. As Chloe tried to sit on the edge of the mattress to comfort him, the intense physical soreness from Arthur's deliberate delay caused her to hiss in pain and instantly jump back up. Her face burned a deep, guilty crimson as she smoothed her coat. Julian's eyes narrowed instantly. What's wrong with your legs? I slipped on the stairs on the way over, Chloe stammered clumsily. Julian snapped, turning his fury onto Arthur to reclaim his dominant victim status. Arthur, how could you not take care of her? She's like an older sister figure to you. Why were you two together so late anyway? Arthur casually leaned against the doorframe, checking his nails. It's completely normal for a man to be with his own girlfriend late at night. What's abnormal is a legal husband questioning his wife's boyfriend. Julian's breath hitched. He was enraged, but he couldn't reveal the truth. The marriage license was obtained through complete emotional manipulation and forged medical documents. If Chloe found out he wasn't actually dying, his hold over her would shatter. Well, it's getting late. I'll leave you two newlyweds to your wedding night. Arthur mocked openly, turning on his heel. Julian realized his plan to make Arthur explode and play the victim had completely failed. Chapter 5. The Three Broken Generals. Arthur's professional life, unlike his romantic farce, was an absolute juggernaut of success. Using his golden sheet ability, he had taken a modest 1 million yuan investment from his parents and scaled it into a massive conglomerate. To run the day-to-day operations, he employed his three generals, three incredibly capable men who were simultaneously magnets for romance novel misfortune. There was Victor, a brilliant financial officer whose CEO girlfriend regularly confiscated his corporate bonuses to fund her male assistant's lifestyle. Marcus, an operations mastermind who had been summarily fired from his previous job because the chairman's spoiled daughter caught him taking a 10-minute nap at his desk. And Leo, a man pretending to be a wealthy heir who worked like an absolute horse to keep up the facade. Arthur paid them astronomical bonuses to keep them loyal, but he actively avoided socializing with them outside of work because they constantly looked at him with an unsettling, trauma-bonded intensity. They viewed him as a sanctuary of logic in a mad world, which deeply annoyed him. Chapter 6. The Ringing of the Bell. The day arrived for the company's initial public offering, IPO. The bell-ringing ceremony at the stock exchange was a historic success, flashing Arthur's name across financial networks globally as the newest multi-billionaire tech mogul. Minutes after stepping off the podium, his phone rang. Chloe was hysterical, screaming over the line. Arthur, how could you do this to me? Your company went public, and you didn't even invite me. You promised years ago that on the day you rang the bell, you would propose to me in front of the world. Where's my proposal? Arthur's voice was as cold as dry ice. You have a legal husband, Chloe. What kind of proposal am I supposed to make to a married woman? Before she could scream another word, he hung up and blocked the number. He turned to his HR director, completely ignoring the emotional storm. Begin screening profiles immediately. I need a new female secretary. High efficiency, zero emotional baggage. Chapter 7. The Freezing Goddess. That evening, Arthur walked out of the corporate headquarters to find Chloe standing by the entrance. She was wearing a plunging, deep V evening dress, shivering violently in the sharp autumn wind, desperately trying to look alluring to regain his affection. Her lips were turning blue, but the romance novel logic dictated that a man should be deeply moved by her sacrifice. Arthur didn't argue. He unlocked his car, let her in, and drove her straight to a luxury hotel. Inside the suite, Chloe immediately tried to leverage her position, weeping softly. Arthur, if you give me 10% of your company shares as a sign of reassurance, I'll find a way to divorce Julian early. I just need security. We can still have the future we planned. Arthur let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Security? Sure, but trust goes both ways. If you want those shares, you have to prove absolute, irreversible loyalty. Tomorrow, I want to see a succubus-style loyalty tattoo inked permanently onto your lower abdomen. Chapter 8. The Photo Album. The very next evening, Chloe returned to the hotel room. She looked deathly pale, trembling as she pulled down the waistband of her skirt to reveal a freshly inked, vibrant red succubus tattoo stamped across her skin. It was painful, inflamed, and completely ruined her pristine image. Arthur looked at it, his expression completely blank. He pulled out his smartphone, unlocked it, and tossed it onto the bed. Chloe picked it up. Her eyes widened in absolute horror. The screen displayed a pre-prepared digital album containing hundreds of crystal-clear, high-definition photographs taken by a private investigator over the past year. It showed her and Julian holding hands at the park, feeding each other dessert at cafes, and sharing intimate kisses in the hospital corridors while Arthur was busy working. "We're done, Chloe," Arthur said smoothly. Realizing she had been played, Chloe completely lost her mind. She let out a primal shriek and lunged at Arthur, her nails aimed at his face. Before she could make contact, the hotel suite door clicked open. Arthur's newly hired executive secretary stepped in, caught Chloe by the shoulder, and firmly shoved her away onto the carpet. Chapter 9. Breaking the Luck Curse. As Chloe wept on the floor, Arthur reflected on the sheer absurdity of the past year. Every single time he had previously attempted to break up with Chloe, the universe's invisible romance luck curse would violently manifest to force them back together. He would inexplicably snap his leg walking on a perfectly flat marble floor, get struck on the head by a falling flower pot from an empty balcony, or find himself relentlessly chased by a pack of unleashed stray dogs. Whenever he was hospitalized in a luxury VIP room due to these bizarre accidents, Chloe would inevitably vanish from his side to tend to Julian, who always happened to be admitted to a standard ward in the exact same hospital for a sudden panic attack. The universe forced him into injuries just to provide a backdrop for their tragic love. To break the cycle, Arthur realized he had to change his strategy entirely. He couldn't just walk away. He had to systematically destroy the logic of the script itself. Chapter 10. The Medical Shift. To break the loop completely, Arthur had simply bought the entire hospital group 6 months ago. Through a deep audit of the medical records, Arthur discovered that Julian had heavily bribed a chief physician to forge his terminal cancer diagnosis. Instead of exposing the lie immediately, Arthur used his leverage to force the corrupt doctor to correct his mistake. For over half a year, every single vitamin and glucose intravenous drip Julian received during his dramatic hospital stays was secretly replaced with high-dose estrogen. Arthur also used his golden sheet ability to master primordial Tai Chi to its absolute limit, giving him reflexes fast enough to dodge high-velocity projectiles and overcome any sudden accidents the universe threw his way. The luck curse could no longer touch him when his physical capabilities defied human limits. Chapter 11. The Childhood Tyrant Returns. Leaving the hotel behind, Arthur drove to his parents' suburban villa. The moment he walked through the door, his mother enthusiastically pulled him toward the living room to introduce him to Diana. Diana was a stunningly beautiful, sharp-eyed woman who had just returned to the country after managing a multinational corporation overseas. She had been Arthur's childhood friend, a fierce little tyrant who used to chase him around the playground until her family relocated during middle school. Arthur's mother, whom Arthur had subtly fed hints to over the past months regarding Chloe's constant infidelity, clapped her hands in pure joy when Arthur officially announced the breakup. The villa filled with laughter as they toasted to his newfound freedom, while Diana watched Arthur with a calculating, deeply intrigued gaze. Chapter 12. Premarital Auditing. A few days later, Diana arrived at Arthur's corporate headquarters, not as a childhood friend, but as the ruthless CEO of her family's multinational enterprise. She brought a massive, multi-billion yuan cross-border collaboration proposal. After the formal meeting concluded and the executives cleared the room, Arthur leaned back in his chair, a playful smirk on his face. "So, CEO Diana, do you remember that promise you made on the playground in middle school? The one where you said you'd marry me when we grew up?" Diana's professional composure instantly cracked. A deep, aggressive blush crept up her neck, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "I remember, and unlike you, I actually intend to keep my word." Instead of arranging a candlelit dinner, Arthur took her straight to a private medical facility for a comprehensive premarital health examination and handed her a thick prenuptial agreement. He wanted facts, not fairy tales. The prenup strictly stipulated that if either party committed infidelity, they would instantly forfeit 30% of their total personal and corporate assets upon divorce. Diana signed it without hesitation, impressed by his ruthlessness. When she playfully tried a grappling move on him, Arthur's Tai Chi reflexes pinned her to the wall instantly, igniting a sudden fire between them. Chapter 13. The Broken Script. Meanwhile, Chloe's life had devolved into a living nightmare. Completely blocked from Arthur's phone, blacklisted by his corporate security, and locked out of his new life, she returned to Julian's apartment in a state of hysterical rage. She grabbed a heavy throw pillow and began violently beating Julian with it, scratching his face with her long nails. "It's all your fault. Arthur left me because of you." Julian, pushed to his absolute limit, snapped. The latent aggression from his fragile ego exploded. He lunged out of bed, overpowered Chloe, pinned her down, and used a thick nylon rope to tie her hands and feet tightly to the heavy wooden bed frame. "Stop pretending to be a pure, innocent goddess, Chloe. We've done everything short of the final step anyway. You belong to me." However, as Julian attempted to assert his dominance, he suddenly froze. The sheer volume of the 100-plus bags of estrogen Arthur had secretly channeled into his system had completely altered his physiology. He found himself entirely, permanently impotent. Chloe stared up from the bed, realized his absolute dysfunction, and let out a cruel, piercing laugh that completely shattered his remaining sanity. Chapter 14. The Ambush at the Plaza. Enraged and humiliated, Julian slapped her hard across the face, stormed out of the apartment, and rushed to the hospital. A battery of urgent tests confirmed the terrifying truth. His endocrine system was completely destroyed, leaving him permanently dysfunctional. Connecting the dots to his specialized treatments, Julian realized Arthur had medically sabotaged him from the shadows. Hysterical and filled with homicidal rage, Julian bought a razor-sharp military fruit knife online, vowing to end Arthur's life. A few days later, Julian lay in ambush behind a concrete pillar outside Arthur's office building. The moment Arthur stepped into the plaza, the universe's romance plot armor attempted to intervene one last time. Arthur's professional bodyguard suddenly froze in place, his limbs stiffening as if struck by a literal paralysis spell. But Arthur was entirely prepared. As Julian lunged out from the shadows, screaming like a banshee with a knife raised high, Arthur didn't blink. He executed a flawless Tai Chi 5-strike combination. With a swift flick of his wrist, he disarmed the knife, struck 3 separate vital pressure points across Julian's chest to collapse his lungs, and delivered a devastating final whip strike that sent Julian flying 5 meters across the pavement. Arthur walked over and stepped heavily onto Julian's fractured wrist. He handed his frozen bodyguard over to his 3 generals to form a mahjong table of useless sidekicks. Julian was swiftly arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Chloe was eventually found unconscious from hunger in the apartment by her parents. Chapter 15. The Final Wedding and Ruin. Half a year later, the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious 6-star hotel was adorned with thousands of imported white roses and champagne hydrangeas. It was the wedding of the century between Arthur and Diana. Outside the iron gates of the hotel estate, a haggard, ruined Chloe stood clutching her stomach. Her life had been completely dismantled. Following Julian's criminal conviction, his father had liquidated their remaining assets and fled the country, while his distraught mother committed suicide. The underground loan sharks turned all of Julian's massive gambling debts onto his legal wife, Chloe. To avoid harassment, Chloe's parents had to sell off all their assets just to secure a divorce. Carrying Arthur's permanent succubus tattoo on her lower abdomen, Chloe knew she was completely ruined. Her grand plan today was to crash the wedding, throw herself at Arthur's feet, and beg to become his hidden mistress. Before she could even approach the outer security checkpoint, 2 pairs of rough hands grabbed her arms. It was her parents. Her father's face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot as he screamed at her through tears. "Are you still not awake? Our family is on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy because of your endless nonsense. Look at him. He is a billionaire tycoon, and you are nothing." They dragged a sobbing, broken Chloe away into the cold, biting wind, her cries completely drowned out by the distant, joyful music playing from the wedding hall. Years later, a hollow, prematurely aged Julian was released from prison. Unable to locate his parents or Chloe, he learned she had moved abroad and married a low-income laborer. Scraping together his remaining pennies, Julian bought a 3rd-class ticket to flee the country, desperately chasing after her ghost. Meanwhile, far away in his high-rise estate, Arthur stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a glass of vintage wine as Diana wrapped her arms around his waist. He smiled down at her, completely liberated from the shackles of the cliché universe, living out his perfectly calculated, unassailable, and wildly successful life. Chapter 16. The International Relocation. Arthur adjusted his watch as he looked down at the flight coordinates flashing across his tablet. 3 months had passed since the grand wedding, and under his calculated direction, his corporate empire was shifting its primary computational nodes and liquidity reserves to a sovereign tech-haven city-state overseas. He didn't do this merely for tax optimization. According to his analysis of the local municipal data, the city where he had spent the last several years was a high-density node for romance novel energy. By entirely removing his physical assets, corporate headquarters, and residential footprint from the region, he was effectively ghosting the universe's narrative network. Diana walked into the private hangar, her tailored corporate suit crisp, her heels clicking perfectly on the polished concrete. She handed him a folder containing the final execution papers for the asset transfer. "The 3 generals are throwing a fit," she said, a sharp, amused smirk playing on her lips. Victor tried to claim that leaving the country would disrupt his girlfriend's assistant's career. Marcus asked if he could stay behind to help the chairman's daughter find her lost cat. I told them both that if they didn't sign the relocation agreements within 10 minutes, I'd freeze their equity. "Good," Arthur said, taking the pen and signing his name with an elegant, unhesitating stroke. "They are competent machinery, but their narrative magnets are too high. Moving them out of the geographic zone of their respective plots will forcefully break their character arcs." "How are the medical updates on Julian?" Diana leaned against the fuselage of the private jet, crossing her arms. "The prison hospital report came in this morning. The estrogen damage to his system has stabilized, but his psychological profile has entirely collapsed. He spends his courtyard time talking to the prison walls, claiming he's the male lead of a tragic masterpiece. The guards have put him on high-dose antipsychotics." Arthur nodded slowly closed a folder, and gestured toward the open cabin door. The engines began to whine, signaling the definitive end of their existence within the boundary lines of the cliché capital. Chapter 17. The Reality of the Border Town. 6,000 miles away, in a damp, industrial border town plagued by constant freezing rain, Chloe stood in front of a grease-splattered metal sink. Her hands, which had once been celebrated across a premium university campus as the pristine, unblemished hands of a piano-playing goddess, were now rough, cracked, and stained with the chemical residue of low-grade dish soap. She was working 12-hour shifts at a commercial kitchen that prepared mass-produced lunchboxes for factory workers. The salary was barely enough to cover the interest on the remaining high-interest personal loans her parents had taken out to pay off Julian's gambling syndicates. Every morning, when she washed herself in the cracked mirror of her studio apartment, the bright red, inflamed lines of the succubus tattoo on her lower abdomen stared back at her. It had become a permanent mark of her ultimate foolishness, a physical brand reminding her of the exact moment she chose to trade billions of yuan in corporate shares for a lifetime of manipulation. The tattoo had faded slightly, the ink blurring under the skin due to poor aftercare, leaving it looking like a jagged, tragic scar. Her current husband, an aggressive, heavy-drinking local logistics clerk named Gary, walked into the small kitchen, tossing a wet coat onto the table. He didn't look at her with the worshipful, desperate adoration Julian used to project, nor did he possess the refined, commanding elegance of Arthur. To Gary, Chloe was simply a disgraced, penniless foreign woman with a ruined family background. The landlord called again. Gary grunted, opening a cheap can of beer. He says if the monthly rent isn't in his account by Monday, he's throwing our things into the alley. Go ask your parents for more money. They don't have any more, Gary, Chloe whispered, her voice entirely devoid of the cold authority she used to wield. They sold everything. They live in a shared basement now. Gary cursed under his breath, slamming the can onto the counter, completely ignoring her tears as she went back to scrubbing the metal pans. Chapter 18. Systemic Erasure. Arthur sat in his brand-new, glass-walled executive office overlooking the harbor of the International Financial District. The air here felt different, sharp, mathematical, and entirely free from the strange, illogical coincidences that characterize his old life. He had spent the last 48 hours running a deep behavioral algorithm through his company's private server, monitoring the social media and financial footprints of everyone connected to his past. Leo, his hyper-efficient secretary, knocked gently and stepped into the room, holding a tablet. Sir, the legal teams have successfully completed the systemic erasure protocol. All public records, past media profiles, university graduation photographs, and archive business news articles tying your name or your family's name to the domestic market have been completely removed from the public network. If anyone searches for Arthur in the Old City database, the search returns a zero-result error code. Excellent, Arthur replied, taking a sip of black coffee. He had utilized his golden sheet ability to write the base code for the data scrubbing algorithm himself, ensuring that no lingering narrative threads could be picked up by the universe's plot structure. What about the legal appeals? Julian's defense attorney tried to file for a medical parole reduction last week, citing severe psychological deterioration, Leo reported, checking his notes. But because our medical group now owns the state-contracted clinical assessment firm providing reports to the correctional department, the panel ruled that his condition is entirely self-induced and non-terminal. His 10-year sentence remains fully locked. He has exactly 9 years and 3 months left. Arthur waved his hand, dismissing the topic. Julian was no longer a character. He was merely a line of static code locked inside a concrete box, completely isolated from any potential second-chance narrative triggers. Chapter 19. The Meeting at the Harbor. The final piece of Arthur's grand architectural plan fell into place on a brisk Tuesday evening. He and Diana stood on the private observation deck of their harborfront villa, watching the massive container ships slide across the deep blue water. Using his instantly mastered financial engineering skills, Arthur had successfully integrated Diana's family corporation into his tech conglomerate, creating an unassailable financial monopoly that was completely immune to hostile takeovers, sudden regulatory blockades, or any other dramatic corporate crisis, tropes common in urban romance novels. Diana turned to him, her eyes reflecting the bright lights of the shipping lanes. She raised her glass of champagne, clinking it against his. I checked the global luxury real estate registries this morning. A small, anonymous holding company tried to buy a property 3 blocks from our estate under a name linked to Chloe's distant relatives. I had our compliance team flag the transaction for international money laundering checks. The purchase was canceled within 2 hours. Arthur smiled, a smooth, relaxed expression that he rarely wore during his years of fighting the narrative curse. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close against the cool evening breeze. You're getting exceptionally good at preemptive containment, Diana. I had an excellent teacher, she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. In this world, if you don't build a fortress around your reality, the scriptwriters will try to turn your life into a tragedy for the entertainment of strangers. We own the fortress now, Arthur. Far across the ocean, in a dark prison cell, Julian stared at his trembling, estrogen-altered hands, weeping in the dark as the guards yelled for silence down the corridor. In a muddy kitchen halfway across the world, Chloe looked down at the succubus tattoo on her stomach, realizing that no miracle was coming to save her. The universe had moved on, leaving its broken characters behind, while Arthur and Diana lived their perfectly insulated, calculated, and unyielding reality. Chapter 20. The Sovereign Reality. The tropical morning sun broke over the expansive glass pavilion of Arthur and Diana's private island estate, painting the horizon in hues of amber and gold. Located far outside the territorial waters of the original narrative matrix, the island was a masterpiece of independent engineering and absolute security. Here, the air was clean, the data streams were pure, and the erratic, logic-defying anomalies of the cliché universe have been reduced to a 0% probability. Arthur stood by the edge of the infinity pool, wearing a relaxed linen shirt. Using his golden sheet ability, he checked the automated global monitoring grid on his tablet one final time. The systemic erasure was total. The old world had completely forgotten him, its dramatic scripts failing to find any purchase on his life. The 3 generals, Victor, Marcus, and Leo, were now running highly optimized international subsidiaries, completely cured of their narrative afflictions through rigorous corporate discipline and isolated geography. Diana stepped out onto the patio, carrying their newborn daughter, Victoria. The child was healthy, peaceful, and entirely free from any forced plot curses or tragic structural destinies. Diana smiled, her sharp, intelligent eyes softening as she leaned into Arthur's side. The final reports from the mainland arrived, Diana murmured, watching the calm ocean waves. Julian's transfer to a permanent psychiatric facility was finalized, and Chloe's family has settled into quiet, unventured obscurity abroad. The narrative loop has officially starved to death. There are no loose threads left. Arthur set the tablet down on the marble table, completely closing the interface. He reached out, gently cupping his daughter's face before wrapping his arms securely around Diana. He had fought a silent, invisible war against a universe designed to humiliate rational men, and through absolute calculations, ironclad logistics, and unwavering emotional control, he had won. Then we are exactly where we are supposed to be, Arthur replied, his voice filled with a genuine, unshakable warmth. No scripts, no forced tragedies, and no coincidences. As the morning tide rolled out, the last remnants of the cliché universe faded into absolute irrelevance. Left behind was a perfectly controlled, unassailable reality, a true sanctuary where Arthur and Diana could finally write their own unwritten, completely peaceful, and wildly successful future.